She had always felt as though she lived behind a veil, hidden from the eyes of the world, even as she moved among the people of the village. The girl grew up in her stepmother's house, a place where shadows seemed to linger longer than anywhere else, as if even the sunlight was reluctant to stay. Her childhood was not filled with stories of her birth, nor the tender touch of a mother's hand or the protective presence of a father. Instead, there was silence. Whenever she asked about where she came from, her stepmother's lips would tighten, and her eyes would grow sharp, warning her not to ask again. Over time, she learned that curiosity carried punishment, and so she swallowed her questions, storing them like hidden stones in her heart. The other children in the village had tales of their ancestry, proud stories told around fires at night. They spoke of fathers who hunted with bravery and mothers whose names carried honor. But when it came to her, there was only emptiness. She had no tales to share, no lineage to boast of, and the silence around her life became louder than any story could have been. People whispered when she passed. Some said she was a child of misfortune, others claimed she was born of something unnatural. Their eyes followed her, curious, suspicious, and sometimes afraid, as though she carried within her something they could not name. Her stepmother kept her away from gatherings whenever she could. Festivals, celebrations, and even funerals were moments when the girl was told to remain indoors, as though her presence would bring shame or suspicion upon the household. She watched from cracks in the walls, glimpsing flashes of dancing, of music, of lives fuller than hers. Each time she felt as though a wall grew taller between her and the world beyond, trapping her in the shadows where no one could truly see her. Inside the home, her existence was carefully controlled. She was given chores that kept her busy and left little time for wandering. If she lingered too long by the river, her stepmother would scold her sharply. If she strayed too close to groups of children playing, she was called back with a tone that brooked no defiance. Slowly, she began to feel that her very presence was a secret that needed guarding. She was not simply a girl, she was something her stepmother was determined to hide. The villagers noticed. They may not have spoken openly, but their glances carried weight. Old women whispered to one another when she passed the marketplace. Men paused in their work to watch her, only to look away quickly as though staring too long might reveal more than they wished to know. Children, too innocent to hide their words, sometimes asked why she looked so different, why her face carried a shadow of sadness when others laughed. They asked who her parents were, and when no answer came, they created stories of their own, stories of curses, of spirits, of secrets better left unspoken. And so the girl grew up surrounded by rumors she did not understand, shrouded in a silence she could not break. The world seemed to keep her at arm's length, as though she were both part of it and yet apart from it. She learned to move quietly, to listen rather than speak, to hide her thoughts deep within herself. She became an observer, watching life unfold around her, always from the edges, always with the sense that she did not fully belong. But deep inside, questions continued to stir, restless and heavy. Why was she hidden? What truth lay behind the whispers? What story of her life had been buried so carefully by her stepmother's silence? She could not yet know that one day those questions would tear through the walls that confined her, and the shadow she had grown up in would give way to revelations strong enough to shatter the very heart of the clan. The girl's world was a cage carefully built by her stepmother. Every part of her life, from the food she ate to the people she spoke to, was under her stepmother's watchful eye. Meals were meager, always the scraps left after the household had been served. If there was meat, she received only bones with barely a sliver of flesh clinging to them. If there was porridge, it was the watery remainder at the bottom of the pot. Hunger gnawed at her constantly, but when she dared to ask for more, the stepmother would narrow her eyes and hiss that she should be grateful for even being allowed to eat at all. She was told that her presence was already a burden, and that without her stepmother's pity, she would have been left to starve. The stepmother also determined who she could speak to, and most often the answer was no one. If she lingered too long in the company of children, the stepmother would swoop in, her words sharp as a blade, accusing her of spreading bad luck. "You'll bring misfortune to their families," she whispered cruelly into the girl's ear, loud enough for others to hear. Slowly, the other children began to avoid her, fearful of the curses that the stepmother suggested clung to her. The girl, craving companionship, found herself speaking only to shadows, to the wind in the trees, or to the faint echo of her own voice in the silence of her room. Even her movements were policed. She was not allowed to wander freely like the other children who chased one another through the fields or bathed in the river's cool waters. Instead, she was ordered to remain inside, often in the dimly lit corners of the house. When she tried to sneak out, her stepmother's punishments were swift. Sometimes it was harsh words, Other times it was heavy chores that lasted long into the night, her small hands raw and bleeding from scrubbing, sweeping, and carrying burdens far too heavy for her age. She grew to understand that freedom was a luxury she might never taste, for each time she reached for it, her stepmother pulled it farther away. The lies were the cruelest part of all. From her earliest memories, the stepmother whispered venom into her ears, shaping her self-image like a potter molding clay. She was told that she was not like other children, that she was weak and unwanted. Her mother, the stepmother claimed, had abandoned her because she carried a curse. Her father, too ashamed, had turned his face away. She was reminded constantly that she was lucky the stepmother had taken her in, otherwise the village would have cast her out or worse. These words sank deep, like roots burrowing into her soul, making her question her worth with every breath she took. The stepmother repeated so often that she was cursed, that the girl began to believe it herself. When crops failed, she wondered if it was her fault. When storms battered the village, she thought her presence had summoned them. Even when a child scraped a knee while playing, she silently feared that somehow she had caused it. Living under such manipulation, her spirit was bent but not completely broken. She endured, though the weight of these lies pressed on her like an invisible shackle. Yet, in the quiet spaces of her heart, something resisted. Each time the stepmother spoke her poison, a small voice inside the girl whispered back that there must be more to her story. When she caught her reflection in a pool of water, she sometimes thought she saw strength in her eyes, though she quickly turned away, afraid of what it meant. At night, when the house fell silent and the stepmother's shadow no longer loomed, she let herself dream, dreams of being free, of walking unafraid in the open, of being loved without condition. But the stepmother sensed even these quiet rebellions. She tightened her grip whenever she saw a spark of defiance in the girl. A punishment would follow, a cutting remark or a cruel twist of truth. "You are nothing without me," she would sneer. "You are nothing at all." The girl bowed her head each time, outwardly defeated, though inwardly she clung to that small flickering flame that refused to die. The control was suffocating, yet it shaped her. In being denied food, she learned to survive on little. In being denied friends, she found solace in her own company. In being denied freedom, she imagined new worlds within her mind. And in being fed lies, she began to search, quietly, secretly, for her own truth. Though the stepmother had wrapped her life in chains, she could not erase the girl's hidden strength, a strength that would one day unravel every lie and bring the truth crashing down upon the household like a storm. The girl moved quietly through the village, her steps soft on the red earth, her eyes lowered to avoid the sharp stares of those around her. Yet even when she tried to vanish into the background, she could feel the whispers trail behind her like shadows. The murmurs were low, often hushed into silence the moment she turned her head, but she could sense them, heavy with unspoken knowledge. Elders who once looked at her with simple disinterest now exchanged guarded glances when she passed. Some looked at her with pity, others with unease, as though they were keeping a truth too dangerous to release. It began with small things. An old woman at the market once paused while weighing out grain, staring so intently at the girl's face that the girl felt her skin burn under the scrutiny. When she asked softly if something was wrong, the woman shook her head quickly, muttered a prayer under her breath and waved her away. Another time, when she fetched water from the river, she overheard two women whispering as they pounded cassava. They spoke of bloodlines that should not have been hidden, and the child who carries the face of another. When they realized she was near, they abruptly laughed, their voices brittle, and changed the subject as though nothing had been said. The girl noticed, too, how her stepmother's presence silenced conversations. Whenever the stepmother entered a gathering, words died in throats, and the only sound left was the clink of bracelets or the shifting of feet. Her stepmother's authority was like a shadow cast over the entire clan. No one dared to challenge her, not openly. She carried herself with a confidence that bordered on menace, her sharp eyes sweeping the room as if daring anyone to speak the secrets they all seemed to carry. The villagers obeyed that unspoken warning, for though they whispered in corners, no one dared to voice aloud what they truly thought. There were moments, however, when the girl caught fragments of truth slipping through. Once, when she was sent to deliver food to an elder, the old man studied her carefully, his cloudy eyes soft with memory. He said her name slowly as if tasting it on his tongue and then muttered, "So much like her," before cutting himself short. The girl's heart raced. "Like who?" she asked, but the man simply waved her away and would not meet her gaze again. The rumors were like threads, scattered and frayed, but together they hinted at something larger. Some said she had the same eyes as a woman long gone, a woman who once defied the clan's traditions. Others claimed her laughter, when she allowed herself to laugh, carried an echo of someone powerful, someone whose presence had been erased from stories told to children. Still others whispered of a birth shrouded in secrecy, of a night filled with storm and omen, when a child entered the world under strange and dangerous signs. The girl herself sensed there was more to her than the stepmother allowed her to believe. The lies she had been told, about being weak, cursed, unwanted, did not match the way the villagers sometimes looked at her. For in those fleeting moments she saw not only suspicion but recognition, as if they knew a part of her that had been hidden from her own eyes. Each glance, each hurried whisper, left her with a gnawing hunger for truth. Still, fear kept the clan silent. They remembered what the stepmother was capable of. She held sway not only in the household but across the village, weaving alliances and favors like a spider's web. She knew people's debts, their secrets, their weaknesses, and she used them to ensure her dominance. To speak against her was to risk disgrace, or worse. So the villagers continued their quiet rituals of avoidance. Eyes averted, tongues restrained, whispers carried only in the safety of shadows. At night, the girl sometimes lay awake, piecing together what little she had overheard. Was she truly cursed, as her stepmother said, or was there another reason why she was kept hidden? She remembered moments when her stepmother's control slipped, when her face tightened at the mention of the girl's father, or when an old song was sung around the fire and the stepmother abruptly silenced it. She remembered a time when a stranger passing through the village had looked at her so intensely that her stepmother had pulled her away, snarling at the traveler as though his gaze alone posed a threat. The whispers grew louder in her mind, even if the villagers spoke them only in fragments. They began to form questions she could no longer ignore. Why did the elders look at her as if she belonged to a story they dared not tell? Why did neighbors hush themselves mid-sentence when she came close? Why did her stepmother guard her so tightly, not just out of cruelty but as if she were hiding her from the world? There was one night when she caught a clearer glimpse of the truth than ever before. Passing by the hearth of an old widow, she overheard the woman speaking in a low, trembling voice to a visitor. "She carries the mark," the widow said. "Anyone with eyes can see it. But who among us has the courage to speak against the woman who keeps her locked away?" The visitor's reply was muffled, but the words heritage and blood reached the girl's ears. Before she could hear more, the widow spotted her and clapped her hands in alarm, sending the girl running into the darkness with her heart pounding. In that moment, the girl knew for certain that the stepmother's lies could not hold forever. The villagers carried knowledge they were too afraid to speak, and though silence weighed heavily on the clan, it could not bury the truth completely. Like roots pushing beneath the earth, the whispers grew stronger, unseen but unstoppable. And though the girl did not yet know the full story, she could feel it pressing closer, as if waiting for the right moment to burst into light. The girl grew older, but with each passing season, the questions inside her heart grew heavier. It was not only the whispers she overheard, or the silence that clung to her stepmother's household, but the way she herself felt out of place among her people. When she stood beside other children, she noticed how her features did not quite match theirs. Her skin carried a shade that seemed to hold the glow of something unfamiliar, her eyes reflected colors the villagers rarely saw, and her voice carried a depth that startled even her when she spoke aloud. At first, she thought little of it. Children often notice differences without attaching meaning to them. But as she grew, so did her awareness, and with awareness came unease. She began to wonder why the elders sometimes stared at her with that long, measuring gaze, as though weighing a memory against the sight of her face. She wondered why children laughed at her for the tone of her voice, why women in the market muttered that she did not resemble her stepmother at all, and why men lowered their voices when she drew near. Every detail of her existence seemed to demand explanation, but none was ever given. And when she gathered the courage to ask, she was met with fury. Once, while helping her stepmother grind millet, she asked quietly, "Whose eyes do I have? For I have looked at yours and they are not the same." Her stepmother's hand froze on the pestle, and then, with sudden violence, she struck the wooden handle against the floor, the sound echoing like thunder. "Do not speak of such things," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut. "You are mine, and that is all you need to know." The girl shrank back, swallowing her question, but the sting of the words remained. Another time she dared to ask about her father. "What kind of man was he? Why does no one speak of him?" she whispered. Her stepmother's eyes narrowed, her lips curling in disdain. "A man who wanted nothing to do with you," she lied smoothly. "A man who left you because you are weak, because you are cursed. That is why I must bear the burden of keeping you." She said it with such conviction that the girl felt a wound open deep inside her chest. The shame of being unwanted weighed heavier than the hunger she often endured. Yet even in her stepmother's cruelty, the girl sensed a tremor, a hint of fear. Why, if she were truly unwanted, was she so carefully hidden? Why, if she were cursed, did her stepmother never let her wander far, never let her speak too long with others, never allow her to linger in the places where stories were told? These contradictions gnawed at her, planting doubt in the soil of her obedience. She tried once more, emboldened by the memory of an elder's slip of the tongue. "There are whispers," she said one evening as they prepared the fire. "People say I look like someone they once knew. Who is she? Who am I?" The stepmother's face turned to stone. Without warning, she seized the girl by the wrist and dragged her closer to the flames. "Ask again," she hissed, her eyes glinting with rage, "and you will learn how quickly a tongue can be burned to silence." The girl trembled, biting back her words, but inside, the fire of her questions only grew stronger. Punishments became the stepmother's shield against the truth. If the girl lingered too long near curious neighbors, she was beaten. If she dared to ask about the marks on her skin that looked like faint patterns of light, she was sent to bed without food. If she ever raised her voice in defiance, she was locked away in a dark corner of the hut, left with only the sound of her own breathing. Fear was meant to teach her submission, to crush the fragile sprouts of her curiosity. But silence is never enough to kill the hunger for truth. The girl learned to bury her questions deep, holding them like seeds in her mind. She watched others carefully, hoping their expressions or slip of words might reveal what her stepmother tried so hard to hide. When elders exchanged glances in her presence, she wondered if they saw a ghost from the past reflected in her. When children asked her why she looked so different, she wondered if even their innocent eyes could see what she had been denied. And at night, when she lay awake listening to the distant cries of night birds, she whispered to herself the questions no one would answer. Who am I? Whose blood runs through my veins? Why must my identity be hidden as though it were a crime? Her stepmother thought punishment would erase the questions, but in truth, it only carved them deeper into the girl's spirit. Each slap, each cruel word, each night of hunger became a reminder that something vital was being kept from her. She grew cautious on the outside, her silence mistaken for obedience, but inside, her thoughts sharpened like a blade. She began to see her stepmother not as a protector, not even as a mother, but as a jailer, holding keys to doors she was forbidden to open. The girl knew little of the world beyond her village, but she understood enough to realize that no child is hidden without reason. No life is silenced without purpose. And if her stepmother worked so hard to bury the truth, then perhaps the truth itself carried power enough to frighten even a woman as feared as her. That thought alone became her secret treasure, the ember she kept alive in the depths of her heart. Though her questions remained unanswered, though her punishments multiplied, she began to walk with a quiet resolve. Someday, she told herself, she would uncover what had been denied her. Someday the silence would break, and the shadows around her birth would give way to light. For though her stepmother sought to shape her with lies, the girl knew she was more than weak, more than unwanted, more than cursed. She was different, and difference, she began to suspect, was the very reason the truth had been hidden from her all along. The season of the festival arrived, the time when the clan gathered to honor their bloodlines and celebrate the strength of their ancestry. It was a grand event, one that filled the village with color, music, and pride. Families prepared for weeks, weaving garments that displayed the patterns of their lineage, practicing songs that told the tales of their ancestors, and polishing the heirlooms passed down through generations. The air itself seemed to hum with excitement as the day approached, for the festival was not only a celebration but a declaration. Every family stood before the community to proclaim where they came from, who they belonged to, and why their name carried weight. The girl's stepmother did everything in her power to keep her away. She told her the festival was not for children like her, that she had no heritage worth honoring, that her presence would only bring shame to the household. She set her to tasks meant to keep her indoors, tending the hearth, grinding grain, carrying water again and again until her arms ached. But the girl's heart longed to see what she had always been denied. Each year she had been hidden, listening from the shadows as the songs of ancestry rose into the night. This time, something inside her burned too strongly to be contained. On the day of the festival, the village gathered in the central clearing. Drums thundered, dancers stamped their feet in rhythm, and elders took their places in honor. One by one, families came forward. A father would raise a staff carved with his forefathers' names. A mother would sing the praises of the women who bore her lineage. Children, dressed in bright patterns, would carry baskets or spears that symbolized their people's strength. Pride shone in every face, every gesture. This was more than celebration, it was identity itself, displayed for all to see. From the doorway of her home the girl watched. Her chest ached with longing as she saw children her age stand proudly beside their families, repeating the names of their ancestors in unison. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "Who would I call? Whose names would I sing?" Her stepmother noticed her watching and snapped, "Back inside." But that day fate intervened. A neighbor stopped by to summon the stepmother for a duty in the festival, leaving the girl alone and unguarded. And so, trembling but determined, she slipped out and followed the sound of the drums. When she entered the clearing, the celebration faltered for a moment. Eyes turned to her and the whispers began at once. "She has no lineage," someone said. "Why is she here?" Others smirked, their glances sharp with mockery. She felt their judgment pierce her like thorns. The children pointed and laughed, mimicking her silence. The women whispered behind their hands and even some elders shook their heads, disapproving of her presence. She stood there alone, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her throat dry with shame. Her stepmother, spotting her, hurried forward with fury in her eyes. She tried to drag the girl away, muttering apologies to the clan for her intrusion. But the drums beat louder and the voices rose again. "Let her stay," someone called mockingly. "Let the girl without a name stand before us." Laughter rippled through the gathering, cruel and sharp. The girl's heart pounded, but she did not turn away. Though she felt the weight of their scorn, something kept her feet rooted to the earth. She could not yet speak, could not yet claim what was hers, but in that moment she knew this. Her silence was not weakness. It was waiting. And as the festival swirled around her, as the pride of others was displayed and her own absence mocked, fate began to weave threads she did not yet see, threads that would one day unravel every lie her stepmother had built. The festival still echoed in the village long after the drums had quieted and the fires dimmed. People carried the memory of the girl's presence with them, whispering behind doors and shaking their heads in disapproval. The stepmother did her best to smother the talk, insisting the girl was nothing more than a cursed child who had slipped out of place. But whispers have a way of surviving and sometimes they even grow louder. It was in the days following the celebration that fate brought someone unexpected to the village. Someone whose eyes carried memory sharper than the silence the stepmother had woven for so long. He was a traveler, an elder from a neighboring clan, walking with the steady gait of one who had seen much of the world. His hair was white, his back slightly bent, but his eyes were keen, the kind that pierced through layers of time. He came to the village as many did, to trade stories, to share news, and to rest his weary bones among familiar faces. The people welcomed him warmly, for he was known as a man whose wisdom had guided many disputes and whose knowledge of bloodlines and histories was unmatched. The girl, curious despite her stepmother's warnings, found herself watching him from a distance. She had learned to stay quiet, to melt into the edges of gatherings, but the elder's presence drew her like a flame. And it was then, as she lingered in the shadows, that his gaze found her. It was not the casual glance of a stranger, it was long, intent, and searching. His eyes narrowed slightly, as though he were measuring the features of her face against a memory long buried. When he finally spoke, his voice carried to those nearest him. "Who is that child?" he asked. The words fell heavily into the air, and suddenly the chatter around him stilled. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, for they had avoided asking such questions openly for years. The stepmother, who stood nearby, stiffened visibly. She forced a smile and replied quickly, "She is mine, an unfortunate child with no story worth telling. Pay her no mind." But the elder did not look away. He studied the girl's eyes, the line of her jaw, the faint mark on her wrist that had always seemed like nothing more than a birthmark to her. His own eyes widened and he muttered under his breath, "So alike, almost too alike." A few villagers leaned in, catching fragments of his words, and curiosity spread like fire through dry grass. The girl felt her skin prickle. For years she had wondered why she looked different, why she carried something that seemed to unsettle people. Now this stranger, this elder, seemed to recognize it instantly. She wanted to step closer, to demand an answer, but fear held her in place. Her stepmother's glare burned into her, a silent warning that froze her feet to the ground. Whispers began to ripple among the crowd. What did he see? Whose face does she carry? What resemblance is this? The air grew thick with suspicion. For so long the clan had chosen silence, but the elders' recognition broke open what they had buried. Doubt began to stir, and with doubt came questions, questions that could no longer be smothered so easily. The stepmother tried to laugh it off, insisting the old man's eyes were clouded by age. But even as she spoke, the unease in the villagers' faces deepened. For though no one dared to challenge her openly, they trusted the elder's knowledge of lineages. If he saw something, if he recognized a resemblance, then perhaps the girl was not what the stepmother had claimed. Perhaps she was more. The girl returned home that evening with her heart heavy and her thoughts racing. She could not forget the way the elder's gaze lingered on her, nor the tremor in his voice when he spoke. Somewhere in the shadows of the past, hidden beneath her stepmother's lies, there was a truth struggling to surface. And though she did not yet know what it was, the clan's silence had begun to crack, and through those cracks, light was seeping in. The stepmother's heart pounded faster with each passing day, though she tried to mask her fear with anger. She began to treat the girl more harshly than ever, seizing on the smallest mistakes as excuses for punishment. If the child spoke too softly, she accused her of plotting. If she spoke too loudly, she was scolded for insolence. Food was withheld, chores multiplied, and the smallest shred of kindness was denied. The stepmother believed that by smothering the girl in cruelty, she could bury the doubts that had begun to rise in the village. Yet in doing so, she only deepened the girl's awareness that something was being hidden from her. The whispers that drifted through the air after the festival gnawed at the stepmother. She overheard villagers remarking on the girl's eyes, on her bearing, on the uncanny resemblance to someone who had once walked proudly among them. Each comment pricked her like a thorn. Panic festered, turning into frantic attempts to isolate the girl. She locked her in dark rooms, barring her from gatherings, and when anyone asked after her, she claimed the girl was ill or too unruly to be seen. Lies multiplied like tangled vines, each one riskier than the last. But the girl had already begun to notice. Each time the stepmother hushed her questions with a slap or a shout, her curiosity sharpened instead of fading. She remembered the way the traveler's eyes had lingered on her, the way elders had exchanged knowing looks. In the silence of her confinement, she wondered why her stepmother seemed so desperate, why her very existence provoked such fear. The more the stepmother lashed out, the more determined the girl became to uncover what was being hidden. At night, the stepmother would sit alone, wringing her hands and muttering to herself, haunted by the possibility that her secret was unraveling. She remembered promises made long ago, deceit woven carefully to protect her own place in the clan. If the truth were revealed, all her years of control would crumble. The girl was no longer the silent, pliant child she had once been. She was changing, asking, watching, and the stepmother felt the weight of that change pressing against her like an oncoming storm. The crueler she became, the more she revealed her desperation. Neighbors began to notice her sharpness, her sudden fury, and some whispered that fear, not authority, drove her. Yet none dared confront her openly, for her tongue was venomous and her influence still strong. Alone in her panic, she doubled her efforts, spinning new lies and new punishments, trying to keep the girl's questions caged. But the fire of curiosity had already been lit, and no amount of cruelty could put it out. One afternoon, while sweeping in the stepmother's hut, the girl noticed a loose board beneath the mat. Curiosity tugged at her, and when she lifted it, she found a small bundle wrapped in old cloth. Her hands trembled as she untied it, revealing objects she had never seen before, tokens too fine and strange to belong to her stepmother. There was a necklace strung with beads that shimmered as if touched by firelight, a strip of cloth bearing colors and patterns unknown to her, and a folded letter whose ink had faded but whose seal still bore the crest of a family she did not recognize. She knew instantly that these things did not belong to the woman who had raised her. They belonged to her. Night after night, she returned to that hiding place, studying each relic with growing wonder. The beads felt warm in her hands, as though carrying the memory of someone who once wore them proudly. The patterned cloth bore symbols that stirred something deep in her chest, like a half-remembered song. Though she could not read the letter fully, the name written at the top echoed in her mind. It was a name she had never been called, yet it felt like it belonged to her more than any other. With every secret she uncovered, the stepmother's cruelty made more sense. These were pieces of a story the woman had tried to bury, but they had survived in silence, waiting to be found. The girl began to hide her discoveries carefully, pretending ignorance whenever the stepmother watched her with sharp eyes. Yet in her heart, new strength bloomed. She carried the necklace under her clothes, its weight against her skin reminding her she was not rootless, not nameless. She began to notice more, elders' glances that lingered too long, whispers that stopped when she entered. The fragments in her possession connected with the fragments around her, and slowly she built the truth. She was not the stepmother's child at all. She belonged to a lineage that had been erased from her life, a family tied to power, memory, and pride. With this realization came clarity. The stepmother's fear, her constant rage, her desperate punishments, all of it had been a cage built to keep the girl from knowing who she truly was. The relics proved the cage had cracks, and through those cracks light poured in. Holding the letter to her chest, the girl whispered the name written upon it. It did not sound foreign or borrowed. It sounded like home. Though the secrets were fragile and incomplete, they had given her something she had never possessed before, the certainty that she was more than the lies told about her. And now that she had unearthed them, there was no going back. The night of the gathering arrived heavy with anticipation. The clan had assembled in the great clearing beneath the tall acacia tree, torches flickering against the wide dark sky. This was no ordinary meeting. Elders had called it to address disputes of land and heritage, matters that always stirred tension in the hearts of families. The girl stood among the edges of the crowd, silent and watchful, the necklace pressed firmly beneath her tunic, the folded letter tucked close to her skin. Her stepmother's hand clamped on her arm like a shackle, trying to keep her in the shadows, but the girl no longer felt bound. Her heart pounded with a steady drumbeat. Tonight, the silence would end. As the speeches rolled on, the stepmother kept glancing nervously, as though sensing the storm building inside the girl. When the elders invited voices from the crowd, the girl stepped forward. A hush fell. She had never spoken in such a gathering before, and her presence alone was enough to make the whispers begin. Her stepmother tried to tug her back, hissing threats under her breath, but the girl shook her off. She raised her chin, and in a voice steadier than she had ever known, she said, "You call me nameless, rootless, cursed. But I know who I am." The crowd shifted uneasily. The elders narrowed their eyes, waiting. The stepmother pushed forward, her tone sharp and mocking. "She is no one. A burden I took in when no one else would. Do not listen to her madness." But the girl reached beneath her tunic and pulled forth the necklace, the beads glinting in the torchlight like drops of flame. A collective gasp rippled through the gathering. One of the oldest elders stepped forward, his hands trembling. "That necklace, I have seen it before. It belonged to the bloodline of Aroka, who vanished years ago." The stepmother's face tightened, but the girl did not stop. From her pocket, she drew out the folded letter and held it high. The wax seal caught the light, unmistakable in its crest. "This speaks of me," she declared, her voice carrying through the night. "This name," she opened it, reading the faded script aloud, "was given at my birth. A name stolen from me. A heritage hidden. You all whispered it in secret, but tonight I claim it for myself." Murmurs turned to cries of astonishment. The elders exchanged frantic looks. Neighbors who had mocked her shifted back, ashamed, while others leaned closer to see the proof in her hand. The stepmother surged forward, snatching at the letter, but the girl stepped away, her eyes burning with a strength that silenced even the boldest hecklers. "You kept me in the dark," she accused, turning her gaze on the woman who had raised her with chains instead of love. "You told me I was cursed, that I was nothing. But it was fear that guided you, not truth. You feared what I might become if I ever knew who I truly was." The stepmother's voice cracked with fury. "Lies. All lies. She twists what she does not understand." Yet her tone wavered and her eyes betrayed her. The elders demanded answers. Why, they pressed, was this child hidden? Why were her tokens concealed? Why did you never bring this before us? The stepmother stammered, weaving excuses, but the more she spoke, the more the crowd's suspicion grew. The girl, steady and resolute, lifted her necklace for all to see and held the letter out to the elders. "If you doubt me, test these relics. You will find truth written in them more honestly than in her words." The tension thickened until the night itself seemed to hold its breath. One elder, his voice heavy with age and authority, declared, "This cannot be dismissed. We see the proof with our eyes. We will hear the truth with our hearts." His words carried weight, and the people began to bow their heads, acknowledging the revelation. Some whispered prayers, others wept, realizing they had scorned a girl who carried the blood of a family once honored among them. The stepmother, cornered, lashed out one final time. She spat curses, insisting the girl's heritage was worthless, her existence a stain. But her words fell flat. No one laughed at the girl now. No one mocked. The proof had spoken, and the weight of truth was undeniable. The crowd turned, their eyes shifting away from the stepmother's venom and back to the girl who had once been hidden in shadows. Standing at the center, the torchlight painting her in gold and fire, she felt the tremor of her own heartbeat slow into calm resolve. For the first time she was not the silenced child. She was her true self, unveiled before the clan. And in that moment, the chains her stepmother had built over years crumbled into dust. The clearing remained heavy with silence after the confrontation, but it was not the silence of uncertainty anymore. It was the silence of a clan facing truths too powerful to ignore. Torches crackled against the night, shadows dancing across the faces of men and women who had spent years laughing at the girl, whispering doubts and allowing cruelty to continue unchecked. Now every one of them stood with their eyes lowered, weighed down by shame. The necklace still gleamed against her chest, the letter rested in the elder's hand, and both were undeniable. The stepmother's lies had unraveled thread by thread, until nothing remained but the naked truth for all to see. The elders, who had once dismissed the girl as insignificant, sat in uneasy council. Their pride stung as they realized how blind they had been, how willingly they had accepted the stepmother's words without question. One of them, his voice hoarse with regret, admitted, "We failed in our duty to protect the blood of our kin. We turned away from signs and swallowed lies. The fault lies not only with her but with us all." Murmurs of agreement spread, though many bowed their heads, unwilling to meet the girl's steady gaze. The stepmother, still trembling with fury, tried to claw her way back into authority. She shouted that the relics were forged, that the girl bewitched the council with falsehood. But her voice cracked, and each denial sounded more desperate than the last. No one moved to defend her. The villagers who had once laughed alongside her mocking words now stepped back, unwilling to be tied to her disgrace. Even the children who had mocked the girl daily clung to their mother's skirts, eyes wide with fear, as if realizing for the first time that cruelty was not without consequence. The girl stood taller, though her heart pounded. For years she had been hidden, silenced, crushed beneath lies. Tonight, the chains of secrecy had shattered. The truth rose like dawn after a long night, impossible to deny, unyielding in its brilliance. She no longer trembled under their stares. Instead, she returned their gaze, calm yet fierce, as though the ancestors themselves stood beside her, affirming her place among the living. The clan's foundation cracked that night. Old hierarchies, built on pride and falsehood, were shaken. Leaders who had turned a blind eye now found themselves humbled, stripped of the illusion of wisdom they had carried. The villagers, so quick to mock, now whispered prayers for forgiveness, not just to the girl but to the spirits who had allowed such injustice to linger in their midst. The great acacia tree under which they stood seemed to listen, its branches swaying in the night wind like a silent witness to their reckoning. The stepmother's fall was swift and absolute. She had built her authority on deception, but with her lies exposed, she was nothing but a husk of bitterness. Some demanded she be cast out, others that she be left to face the shame of her deeds daily among those she deceived. She shrieked, cursed, pleaded, but her voice no longer carried the power it once held. For the first time, the girl saw fear in the eyes of the woman who had ruled her life with cruelty. That fear was not for the girl's power alone, but for the truth she had tried so desperately to bury. The girl did not gloat. She did not scream or strike out. She stood with quiet strength, letting the truth speak louder than vengeance. When the elders turned to her, asking what should be done, she simply said, "The truth is enough. Let her live with it." Her words, soft but resolute, carried more weight than all the stepmother's cries. And so the woman who had once bound her in chains of lies now stood stripped of dignity, powerless against the very child she had tried to erase. As the night stretched on, the villagers began to tell and retell what they had seen. Children whispered wide-eyed to one another, women murmured by the fires, men shook their heads in disbelief. The story spread like fire through dry grass. The girl hidden in shadows who revealed herself as the bearer of truth, the stepmother undone by her own deceit, the clan forced to confront its blindness. Already the legend began to take shape, carried by the voices of those who had once mocked her, now turning her story into one of warning and awe. By dawn the girl no longer walked alone. Elders bowed their heads as she passed, villagers offered her food and greetings, children peered at her with a mix of fear and reverence. She was no longer nameless, no longer rootless. She carried the truth of her lineage, and with it the power to change the destiny of the clan. They would remember her not as the cursed child, but as the one who shattered the silence, the one who forced them to see themselves as they truly were. The stepmother remained in the shadows, her authority dissolved, her pride broken. But the girl, once hidden behind her lies, stepped into the light of her true identity. And as the clan rebuilt itself on this new foundation of truth, her presence stood as a reminder. Lies may bind for a time, but truth always rises. That night, the clan was shattered, but from its ruins rose a truth so powerful that it would echo through generations.